Isabel Morgan, 29, stood frozen in the doorway of her own executive office, watching her father Warren lecture her boss, Mitchell, about firing her. "She's just a secretary with delusions of grandeur," Warren scoffed, completely unaware that 3 months ago, I had quietly purchased controlling interest in Morgan Financial Solutions, the company my father had pushed me out of 2 years prior. The blood drained from Dad's face when Mitchell finally said, "Mr. Morgan, I think you should know that Isabel doesn't work for me. I work for her." If you're watching this and feeling that surge of satisfaction at seeing someone finally get what they deserve, I completely understand. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind. Before I continue with how my father's face turned from confident to ashen in seconds, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you. My story about reclaiming what was rightfully mine is just beginning, and trust me, karma comes for everyone eventually. Morgan Financial Solutions wasn't just a company to me. It was my heritage, my birthright. My grandfather, Harold Morgan, started the firm from nothing in 1978, working out of a tiny office with just 2 employees. I grew up hearing stories about how he built the business client by client, handshake by handshake. By the time I was born, it had grown into one of the most respected financial advisory firms in Boston. Some of my earliest memories are of visiting Grandpa Harold at the office. He would let me sit in his big leather chair, give me a legal pad to scribble on, and tell me, "One day, Izzy, all of this could be yours if you want it." While other little girls had princess dreams, I dreamed of spreadsheets and client meetings. My grandfather noticed my interest and nurtured it. On Saturday mornings, while my sister Rachel was at dance class, Grandpa would teach me about stocks, bonds, and the importance of compound interest. He'd quiz me on financial terms and beam with pride when I got them right. "You have the Morgan mind for money," he'd tell me. "Just like me." My father Warren, however, didn't share my grandfather's progressive views. Though he'd taken over day-to-day operations when Grandpa semi-retired, he remained stubbornly old-fashioned. During my high school years, when I expressed my intention to study business and eventually join the family firm, he patted my head like I was still 6 years old. "Finance isn't really a woman's world, Isabel," he said. "It's aggressive, cutthroat. You'd be happier in something more suitable." His dismissal only fueled my determination. I graduated high school with a perfect GPA and earned a full scholarship to Wharton. 4 years later, I had my undergraduate degree in finance and 2 years after that my MBA. Throughout my education, I interned at competing firms, built my network, and prepared myself to take my rightful place at Morgan Financial. I thought my credentials would finally make my father see me as worthy. I was wrong. When I joined the company at 24, despite my qualifications, my father insisted I learn the business from the ground up. That might have made sense if everyone was held to the same standard. But 6 months after I started in an entry-level position, my sister Rachel married Derek Foster, a charming but mediocre investment advisor with a bachelor's degree from a state college and 3 years of unremarkable experience. Within weeks of the wedding, Dad brought Derek into Morgan Financial as a junior advisor. Within 6 months, he was managing accounts. By the end of his first year, while I was still stuck analyzing data for other advisors despite consistently providing the most accurate forecasts in the department, Derek was attending executive meetings and being introduced to our biggest clients. "He's family now," Dad would say when I questioned the disparity. And clients respond better to men in this business. That's just reality, Isabel. For 3 years, I watched as Derek rose through the ranks based on nothing but my father's favor. I worked twice as hard, stayed later, produced better results, and still found myself passed over for promotions that went to my brother-in-law. The only person who seemed to notice the injustice was my grandfather, who had fully retired by then but still kept tabs on the business. "Warren's making a mistake," Grandpa told me during one of our weekly lunches. "The clients like you better. The numbers don't lie." But Dad's mind was made up. Derek was his golden boy, the son he never had. And the final betrayal came during a board meeting when I was 27. I had prepared a detailed presentation on expanding our services to include sustainable investing options, something our clients had been asking for, and that could have significantly grown our business. I had spent weeks researching, creating financial projections, and developing a comprehensive implementation plan. This was my chance to prove my value beyond doubt. 10 minutes into my presentation, my father interrupted. "This all seems very speculative, Isabel," he said loudly. "I don't think our clients want us experimenting with their money on trendy investment fads." "It's not a fad, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The data clearly shows." "Derek," my father cut me off, turning to my brother-in-law. "What do you think? You work with our premium clients." Derek, who had been playing with his phone throughout my presentation, looked up with a smirk. "I think Isabel means well, but she's overcomplicating things. Our clients trust our traditional approach. That's why they come to us." He hadn't read a single page of my research. Didn't know that 3 of our biggest clients had specifically asked about sustainable options. But the board members were nodding along with him. "Thank you, Derek. Always practical," my father said approvingly. Then he turned to me with thinly veiled contempt. "Isabel, I think you should focus on what you're good at, the administrative side of things. Leave the big picture planning to those with more direct client experience." The room fell silent. Everyone heard what he really meant. You'll never be more than a glorified secretary. I finished my presentation on autopilot, gathered my materials, and left the room with as much dignity as I could muster. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. I had my grandfather's eyes, his determination. I would not cry. After that meeting, I was effectively demoted. My client contact was restricted. Derek was given oversight of my work. Projects I had initiated were reassigned. When an advisory position opened up, one for which I was perfectly qualified, it went to an outside hire, a golfing buddy of my father's. The final straw came when I discovered that Derek and my father had been systematically removing me from accounts I had helped build. They would schedule client meetings when I was known to be unavailable, then tell the clients I was more interested in administrative work. When I confronted my father, his response was brutal in its honesty. "This is a family business, Isabel, but that doesn't mean everyone in the family is suited to lead it. You're too emotional, too idealistic. Clients want stability, tradition. Derek understands that." "I am your daughter," I said, my voice shaking. "This company is my birthright too. Being my daughter doesn't entitle you to a position you're not qualified for," he replied coldly. "If you can't accept your place here, perhaps you should look elsewhere." So I did. The next day, I resigned. My father didn't try to stop me. Derek looked smugly satisfied. Only my assistant Patricia seemed genuinely sorry to see me go. That weekend, I visited my grandfather at his retirement home. At 82, his body was failing, but his mind remained sharp. When I told him what had happened, tears finally broke through my professional facade. "He never believed in me, Grandpa. Not once." Grandpa Harold took my hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. Warren was always afraid of change. Afraid of anything that threatened his control. He looked me directly in the eyes. "But he's wrong about you, Izzy. And I'm disappointed in him." Those words, coming from the man my father had always desperately sought approval from, gave me the first glimmer of an idea. A plan was beginning to form. The month after I left Morgan Financial was the lowest point of my life. I went through the motions of job hunting while battling the profound sense of betrayal that colored everything. My own father had pushed me out of my family legacy because I had the audacity to be both competent and female. Some days, getting out of bed felt impossible. My mother called frequently, her voice carefully neutral. "Your father means well," she would say. "He just wants to protect you from the harsher aspects of the business world." My sister Rachel was torn between loyalty to her husband and concern for me. "Derek says Dad is keeping your job open," she told me over coffee. "He says you can come back anytime." I didn't bother explaining that the job they were keeping open was essentially a demotion to executive assistant. Instead, I smiled and changed the subject. Family peace had always been important to Rachel, and I wouldn't force her to choose sides. Not yet, anyway. The only person who truly understood was Grandpa Harold. 3 weeks after my resignation, he called and asked me to visit him on a Tuesday morning when he knew my father would be in quarterly planning meetings. I found him sitting in his small private garden at the retirement community, a leather portfolio on his lap and a look of determination on his face that instantly reminded me of my own reflection. "Sit down, Izzy," he said, patting the bench beside him. "I've been doing some thinking." He opened the portfolio to reveal legal documents, account statements, and shareholding certificates. "Your father may run Morgan Financial day-to-day, but he doesn't own it outright," Grandpa explained. When I stepped back, I retained 30% of his shares. Warren has 45%. The rest is divided among minor shareholders and board members. I knew this, of course, but had never seen much significance in it. My father's position as CEO and his relationship with the board gave him effective control. "I'm 82 years old," Grandpa continued, "and I need to make decisions about my estate. I've always planned to divide my shares between you and your sister, but I've been reconsidering." He handed me a document. It was a transfer of shares, his entire 30% stake in Morgan Financial, signed over to me. "Grandpa, I can't accept this," I gasped. "Rachel will be well taken care of in other ways," he finished firmly. "Rachel has never wanted a role in the business. You do, and you deserve it." His eyes, so like my own, held mine steadily. "The question is, what will you do with these shares?" That question sparked something in me, the first real sense of possibility I'd felt since leaving the company. 30% wasn't controlling interest, but it was significant. With the right strategy, it could be leverage. "I need time to think," I told him. "Take all the time you need," he replied. "The paperwork is ready when you are." Over the next week, I did my research. I quietly reached out to Patricia, my former assistant, who was still loyal to me. She confirmed what I had suspected. Under Derek's influence, several major accounts were underperforming. 2 had already left. Client satisfaction was dropping. I also contacted Jason Wilson, a securities lawyer I had met during my MBA program. Over dinner at a discreet restaurant outside the city, I laid out a hypothetical scenario. "Hypothetically," Jason said with a knowing smile, "you could accept your grandfather's shares, but keep the transfer private for now. Massachusetts corporate law doesn't require immediate disclosure for privately held companies unless there's a specific provision in the company bylaws." "And if I wanted to acquire more shares?" I asked. "Hypothetically, you could create a shell company to purchase them. As long as you don't hit the disclosure threshold, no one would know you're the buyer." The idea took root and grew. With my grandfather's 30% and careful purchases of additional shares, I could potentially gain controlling interest. But I needed capital, connections, and secrecy. The first person I approached was Mitchell Reed, a respected veteran of the financial industry who had recently retired from a competing firm. He had been a mentor to me during my internship years and had always expressed disappointment that I hadn't joined his firm instead of my father's. When I explained my situation and my plan, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "It's ambitious," he said finally. "Risky. Your father won't take it well." "I'm not doing this to hurt my father," I clarified. "I'm doing it to save my grandfather's company from my father's poor judgment." Mitchell nodded slowly. "I believe you. And I've been bored in retirement." His eyes twinkled. "How can I help?" With Mitchell's guidance, I created Horizon Capital Partners, a shell company that began quietly purchasing Morgan Financial shares from minor shareholders. Many were happy to sell. The company's performance had been declining, and they were nervous. My grandfather introduced me to Evelyn Parker, his longtime friend, and the widow of his former business partner. She owned 5% of Morgan Financial and had been increasingly concerned about Warren's leadership. "Harold always said you were the one with the real financial mind," she told me over tea at her Beacon Hill home. "I'd rather sell my shares to you than watch Warren run this company into the ground." Between my grandfather's 30% Evelyn's 5%, and the additional 16% we acquired through Horizon Capital, I reached the critical 51% threshold within 2 months. I now owned controlling interest in Morgan Financial Solutions. The legal work was complex and expensive, depleting most of my savings. The emotional toll was even higher. I had to maintain absolute secrecy, which meant continuing to act as though I was merely job hunting. I couldn't tell my mother or sister what I was planning. I had to endure family dinners where Derek boasted about his role at the company while shooting me pitying glances. "Any luck with the job search?" he would ask with false concern. "Still exploring my options," I would reply, suppressing the urge to tell him I was about to become his boss. Throughout it all, Mitchell Reed was my public face. On paper, he was the primary investor behind Horizon Capital Partners. He would be the one to initially approach Morgan Financial about the change in ownership, while I remained in the background until the time was right. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Mitchell asked me the night before we filed the final paperwork. "Once we move forward, there's no going back. Your family relationships may never recover." I thought about my father's dismissive words, about Derek's smug satisfaction, about my grandfather's belief in me. "I'm sure," I said. "It's time to take back what's mine." The first week after the acquisition was finalized, I experienced a strange double life. Officially, I had accepted a position at Rivera Financial, a small competing firm. In reality, I was working 18-hour days with Mitchell, strategizing how to turn Morgan Financial around without revealing my involvement. Mitchell played his role perfectly. As the public face of Horizon Capital Partners, he called an emergency board meeting and announced the change in ownership. My father was blindsided. "This is outrageous," he sputtered, according to Patricia, who still kept me informed. "Who are these people? What do they want with our company?" "I believe they want what any investor wants," Mitchell had replied calmly. "A profitable return on their investment. Something Morgan Financial hasn't been providing lately." The board members, many of whom had been my father's golfing buddies for decades, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They couldn't argue with the facts. Client retention was down. Profits had dropped 12% in the past year alone. "For now," Mitchell continued, "the board will remain intact. But there will be changes to operational leadership. Effective immediately, I will be stepping in as interim CEO." My father had apparently turned purple. "This is my company." "Actually, Mr. Morgan," Mitchell corrected him, "it's Horizon Capital's company now. And they've tasked me with improving performance." Dad had stormed out. Derek had remained, attempting to charm Mitchell with assurances of his value to the firm. Mitchell had simply smiled noncommittally and said all positions would be evaluated based on merit. Over the next month, working through Mitchell and a small team of trusted new hires who didn't know my connection to the Morgan family, I began implementing changes. We conducted a thorough audit of all accounts, identifying those at risk and developing strategies to improve performance. We reviewed every employee's contribution and productivity. The results confirmed what I had suspected. Derek had been mismanaging several major accounts, relying on personal charm rather than financial acumen. 3 longtime clients were on the verge of leaving. Meanwhile, talented advisors had been sidelined if they weren't in my father's inner circle. Through Mitchell, we began making changes. Derek's largest accounts were reassigned to more competent advisors. Promising employees were given opportunities to prove themselves. The sustainable investment initiative I had proposed, and my father had rejected, was revived and implemented. Patricia was promoted to office manager, a position she had deserved for years. When she called to thank me, thinking I had put in a good word before leaving, I had to bite my tongue to keep from revealing the truth. "Mitchell Reed sees talent where others don't," I said instead. "I'm not surprised he recognized yours." My father, meanwhile, was fighting the changes at every turn. He called board members, tried to rally employees against the new leadership, and even attempted to contact clients directly to undermine Mitchell's authority. But as the company's performance began to improve, his protests gained less traction. 2 months in, we hired Samantha Williams, a brilliant financial strategist I had known from Wharton. She was put in charge of the sustainable investment division, which was already attracting new clients. I don't understand why Morgan Financial didn't pursue this direction sooner, she told Mitchell in a meeting I observed via video conference, my camera off. There's clearly demand for it. Previous leadership had different priorities, Mitchell replied diplomatically. By the third month, financial results were speaking for themselves. Client retention had stabilized. New accounts were coming in. Employee morale was improving as merit was rewarded over connections. Derek was growing increasingly desperate. His position had been effectively reduced to handling minor accounts, and even those were under scrutiny. According to Patricia, he had been overheard on the phone with my father, panicking. They're going to find out about the Lawson account, he had hissed. We need to fix this before they look too closely. I immediately had our audit team investigate the Lawson account. What they found was disturbing. Derek had been churning the account, making excessive trades to generate commissions while actually losing money for the client. It was not only unethical, but potentially illegal. Mitchell called Derek into his office the next day. I wished I could have been there to see his face when presented with the evidence. This ends now, Mitchell told him. The client will be made whole, the account reassigned, and you will be on probation. If I find any other accounts with similar issues, your employment will be terminated. Derek, always a coward at heart, broke down and blamed my father. According to him, Warren had encouraged the practice with certain accounts to boost short-term numbers. I wasn't entirely surprised, but the confirmation still hurt. My father had not only pushed me out unfairly, but had compromised the ethical standards my grandfather had established. By the end of the third month, industry publications were taking notice of Morgan Financial's turnaround. A profile in the Boston Business Journal praised the company's innovative new direction and return to client-focused values. The reporter speculated about who was really behind Horizon Capital Partners, noting that Mitchell Reed's sudden return from retirement seemed convenient. Some industry insiders suspect a competitor may have orchestrated the takeover, the article stated. Others point to former Morgan Financial executive Isabel Morgan, who left the company under unclear circumstances last year and has financial expertise that aligns with the new strategies being implemented. When my sister texted me a screenshot of that paragraph with a series of question marks, I simply replied, "Interesting theory." But I knew the time for hiding was coming to an end. I had proven I could turn the company around. Now I needed to step into the light and claim what was rightfully mine. Are you ready for this? Mitchell asked when I told him my decision. Your father won't take it well. I've been ready my whole life, I replied. Let's set the meeting for next week. The night before the revelation, I visited my grandfather. His health had been improving as I kept him updated on the company's progress. You've done more in 3 months than Warren did in 3 years, he said proudly. Tomorrow, everyone will know it. Are you sure I'm doing the right thing? I asked, suddenly doubtful. This might destroy my relationship with Dad forever. Grandpa Harold took my hand. Warren destroyed that relationship when he refused to see your worth. You're not just taking back a company, Izzy. You're taking back your birthright and your dignity. I left his retirement home with renewed determination. Tomorrow would change everything. I had Mitchell schedule a meeting with my father and Derek, ostensibly to discuss the future direction of the company. The stage was set for my return. The morning of the confrontation, I woke up at 5 a.m. after a night of fitful sleep. The dreams had been vivid, standing in my grandfather's office as a little girl, watching him work, believing that someday this would all be mine. And now, in a way I hadn't anticipated, it was. I took extra care with my appearance, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without trying too hard. The pearl earrings my grandfather had given me for my college graduation. Hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Minimal makeup, except for my signature red lipstick, war paint, as my mother always called it. As I drove to the office that was now legally mine, I thought about how much had happened in just 5 months. From being pushed out of my family company to secretly taking control of it. The journey had been exhausting, expensive, and lonely. There had been moments of doubt, nights spent wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But underneath it all was the certainty that I was fighting a wrong that needed to be righted. I parked in the visitors section rather than the executive lot.
Not yet.
That would come after. Mitchell met me at the side entrance as planned. Are you ready for this? He asked, concern evident in his eyes. Mitchell had become more than a business partner in these months. He'd become a mentor and friend. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We went up to what had once been my grandfather's office, now Mitchell's on paper, but soon to be mine in truth. I had kept most of the original furniture, including my grandfather's massive oak desk. But I'd made one symbolic addition. My old nameplate from when I was just a secretary was prominently displayed on the desk, a reminder of how far I'd come and how my father had underestimated me. They'll be here at 10, Mitchell said. I've told reception to send them straight up. I nodded, my stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I'll wait in the adjoining conference room until you signal me. Isabel, Mitchell said before I stepped away, whatever happens today, remember that you've already won. The company is thriving under your leadership. That's what matters most. He was right, of course. But this confrontation wasn't just about business. It was about standing up to the man who had dismissed me my entire life. It was personal in a way that quarterly reports and client acquisitions could never be. At 9:45, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Rachel. Dad and Derek heading to meeting with new owner. Dad in terrible mood.
What do you know about this?
I stared at the message, wondering how to respond. Rachel was caught in the middle. She loved me, but she was married to Derek and had always sought our father's approval. Today would force her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about her husband and her father. You'll hear everything soon, I texted back. Just remember I love you no matter what. Her reply came quickly. You're scaring me. What's going on? I put my phone away without responding. She would know soon enough. At 9:58, Patricia called from reception. They're here, she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. Patricia was one of the few employees who knew the truth. And Mr. Morgan is already complaining about having to meet with whoever this Mitchell Reed character thinks he is. Thank you, Patricia, I said. Send them up. Through the partially open door of the conference room, I could hear them arrive. My father's voice, as commanding and dismissive as ever. Derek's sycophantic laughter at whatever comment my father had made. Mitchell, my father said, not bothering with pleasantries. I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the direction of this company. I couldn't agree more, Warren, Mitchell replied smoothly. Please have a seat. I'll stand, my father said. Always the power move. I'll be brief. These changes you're implementing, they're disrupting client relationships I've spent decades building. The board is concerned. The board seemed quite pleased with our quarterly results, Mitchell countered. Client retention is up 15%. New accounts have increased. The Sustainable Investment Division has exceeded projections. Short-term gains at the expense of our company culture, my father dismissed. And speaking of culture issues, I want to discuss my daughter, Isabel. My heart raced at the mention of my name. This was it. What about her? Mitchell asked innocently. I understand you've been in contact with her, my father said accusingly. That she may even be consulting for you in some capacity. She's a very talented financial advisor, Mitchell replied neutrally. She's just a secretary with delusions of grandeur, my father scoffed. Competent enough at administrative tasks, but lacking the judgment and temperament for real financial leadership. Derek chimed in eagerly. Absolutely. Clients need stability, experience. Isabel is too emotional, too unpredictable. I see, Mitchell said. And what would you suggest I do about Isabel? Fire her, my father said bluntly. Whatever consulting arrangement you have, end it. She'll undermine you, just like she tried to undermine me with her ridiculous sustainable investment scheme. I could hear the derision in his voice, the absolute certainty that he was right and I was wrong. It was the same tone he'd used my entire life whenever I'd tried to assert myself. The Sustainable Investment Division that's brought in $12 million in new assets this quarter? Mitchell asked mildly. There was a pause. I could imagine my father's face, struggling to maintain his authoritative expression. Beginner's luck, Derek interjected. Those accounts will underperform long-term. I appreciate your concern for the company, Mitchell said. But I think there's something you should know about Isabel. I took a deep breath. This was my cue. Mr. Morgan, Mitchell continued, I think you should know that Isabel doesn't work for me. I work for her. I stepped into the doorway of the office, just in time to see the blood drain from my father's face. I don't know if I've ever felt more raw emotion than in that moment, watching my father's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to the dawning horror of realization. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I finally spoke.
Hello, Dad. Derek.
I believe we have some things to discuss about the future of Morgan Financial. If you've ever had that moment where everything you've worked for finally comes together, you know exactly how I felt. Standing there in the doorway of the office that was now mine, facing the men who had dismissed me as just a secretary. It took everything I had not to break character in that moment. If you're enjoying this story of family betrayal and workplace justice, please hit that like button. I struggled for years before I found the courage to stand up for myself, and your support means I can keep sharing these difficult family stories with all of you. Now, let's get back to the moment my father realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his career. The silence that followed my entrance was absolute. My father stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the confident businessman persona completely shattered. Derek's eyes darted between my father and me, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to panic. What is this? My father finally managed, his voice uncharacteristically thin. What kind of joke are you playing, Mitchell? No joke, Mr. Morgan, Mitchell replied calmly. As I said, Isabel is my employer, not the other way around. I moved fully into the room, taking my place behind the massive oak desk that had once been my grandfather's. The symbolism wasn't lost on my father, whose eyes narrowed as I sat in the executive chair. That's not possible, he said flatly. You don't have the resources or the authority. Actually, I do. I opened a folder on the desk and removed the legal documents detailing my ownership. 3 months ago, Horizon Capital Partners acquired controlling interest in Morgan Financial Solutions. I am the sole owner of Horizon Capital. Derek stepped forward, his charm offensive immediately deployed. Isabel, if this is some kind of revenge play because you were passed over for promotion, this isn't about revenge, Derek. I cut him off. This is about saving a company that was being run into the ground by incompetence and nepotism. My father's face flushed with anger. How dare you? I built this company. Grandfather built this company. I corrected him. You inherited it. And under your leadership, client satisfaction dropped 23%. 3 major accounts were on the verge of leaving. The Lawson account was being illegally churned. At the mention of the Lawson account, Derek paled visibly. My father shot him a warning glance. That's a serious accusation, my father said stiffly. It's not an accusation, it's a fact, I replied. We've already restructured the account and made the client whole. We chose not to report the violation this time, but all accounts are now being audited. Derek stepped back, looking as if he might be ill. My father, however, was regaining his composure, shifting from shock to calculation. I could almost see the gears turning as he tried to find a way to regain control of the situation. Even if what you're saying is true, he said, how exactly did you acquire controlling interest? The major shareholders would have had to sell to you. Yes, they would, I agreed. And they did. I handed him another document, the share transfer for my grandfather. My father scanned it, his face hardening. Dad sold you his shares, he said flatly. It wasn't a question. He believed in me, I said simply. He saw what you refused to see. For a moment, something like hurt flashed across my father's face. He and my grandfather had always had a complicated relationship. Grandpa Harold had built the company through innovation and risk-taking. My father had maintained it through caution and tradition. They respected each other, but rarely saw eye to eye. The remaining 21%, my father asked, his voice tight. Various shareholders who were concerned about the company's direction under your leadership. Evelyn Parker, Thomas Whitaker, several others. My father's jaw clenched at the names. Longtime family friends and business associates who had apparently lost faith in him without his knowledge. So this whole time, he said slowly, while you were pretending to look for another job, coming to family dinners, you were secretly plotting to take over the company. I was secretly saving the company, I corrected. And I didn't enjoy the deception, but given how you'd treated me, I didn't see another option. Derek, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly found his voice. This is ridiculous. The board won't stand for this. The board already knows, Mitchell interjected. They've seen the legal documentation and the improved quarterly results. They've unanimously voted to support the new leadership structure. Which brings us to why we're here today, I continued, turning my attention fully to my father and Derek. To discuss your futures with Morgan Financial. Derek immediately shifted to pleading mode. Isabel, I know we've had our differences, but I've always respected your abilities. I think we could work well together under the new structure. The shamelessness of his pivot was almost admirable. This was the same man who had called me too emotional less than 10 minutes ago, who had systematically undermined me for years. My father, however, wasn't going to grovel. His face had settled into the cold mask I knew so well. You won't get away with this, he said quietly. There are legal options. The company bylaws have been reviewed extensively by our legal team. I finished for him. My ownership is legitimate and binding. The question is not whether I have the right to make changes, but what changes I will make. Through the glass walls of the office, I could see employees gathering, drawn by the unusual sight of my father and Derek in what was clearly a tense meeting with Mitchell and me. Word had spread quickly. Patricia stood among them, making no effort to disperse the onlookers. She caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. So what now? My father asked. You fire me from my own company? The company I've given 30 years of my life to? For the first time since entering the room, I felt a twinge of sympathy. My father was not an evil man. He was a product of his generation, blind to his own biases, unable to see past his preconceptions. But his dismissal of me had been real, and the damage he'd done to the company was measurable. I'm not going to fire you, I said finally. I'm offering you a choice. You can stay on as a senior advisor with no management responsibilities but with the opportunity to maintain relationships with the clients who trust you. Or you can resign with a generous severance package and the freedom to pursue other opportunities. He stared at me, clearly caught off guard by the offer. He had expected vindictiveness, not pragmatism. And Derek? He asked, gesturing to my brother-in-law who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. I turned my gaze to Derek. Derek's situation is more complicated. The loss in account issue is serious. Under normal circumstances, it would be grounds for immediate termination. Derek swallowed hard. Isabel, please. However, I continued, out of respect for my sister, I'm willing to offer you a probationary period. 6 months, with close supervision, handling only small accounts. If there are no further issues, we can reassess. Derek looked as if he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He nodded stiffly. My father was studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between resentment and reluctant respect. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He said. I had to, I replied. You didn't leave me much choice. He straightened his tie, visibly pulling himself together. I'll need time to consider your offer. Of course, I said. Take the rest of the week. Let me know your decision on Monday. My father nodded curtly, then turned to leave. Derek hesitated, looking as if he wanted to say something more, but then followed my father out. As they walked through the bullpen, employees quickly pretended to be busy, but everyone was watching. The king had been dethroned, and they all knew it. When they were gone, Mitchell closed the office door and turned to me with a smile. Well done, he said. You kept your composure beautifully. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I'm not sure how I feel, I admitted. Part of me wanted to scream at them for how they treated me. Another part feels sorry for my father. That's because you're not like him, Mitchell said gently. You can separate business from personal. I wasn't so sure about that. The line between business and personal had been blurred in my family for generations. But I had done what I needed to do to save the company and reclaim my place in it. Now I just had to deal with the family fallout. My phone started ringing less than an hour after my father and Derek left the office. My mother. Then my sister. Then my mother again. I let the calls go to voicemail, needing time to prepare for the conversations ahead. My mother's message was tearful and confused. Isabel, your father just came home absolutely beside himself. He's saying you've taken over the company? That can't be right. Please call me back. Rachel's was angry. What the hell, Izzy? Derek just told me you humiliated him and Dad in front of the entire office. How could you do this to our family? I texted them both. I'll explain everything tonight. Dinner at my place, 7 o'clock. Then I called my grandfather. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. How did it go? He asked without preamble. About as well as could be expected, I replied. Dad's angry. Derek's terrified. I offered them both options to stay, but I'm not sure they will. Warren's pride won't let him stay, Grandpa said with certainty. Not at first, anyway. Give him time. I'm having dinner with Mom and Rachel tonight, I told him. Any advice? Be honest, he said simply. They deserve to know why you did what you did. After that, it's up to them. That evening, I prepared a simple meal. Nothing elaborate that would suggest celebration. This wasn't a victory dinner, it was a difficult family discussion that happened to include food. My mother arrived first, looking tired and confused. Caroline Morgan had always been the peacekeeper in our family, smoothing over conflicts, making excuses for my father's behavior, trying to keep everyone happy. She hugged me tightly when I opened the door. Isabel, what's going on? Your father won't tell me anything except that you've betrayed the family. It's complicated, Mom, I said, leading her to the living room. Let's wait for Rachel before I explain everything. Rachel arrived 10 minutes later, her expression a mixture of anger and hurt. She declined my offer of a hug. Derek is devastated, she said immediately. He says you accused him of illegal activity and demoted him in front of everyone. That's not exactly what happened, I replied carefully. But yes, there were serious issues with how Derek was handling certain accounts. He says you're making it up to get revenge. I sighed. Let's sit down. I'll explain everything from the beginning. Over dinner, I laid out the whole story, my gradual marginalization at the company, the sustainable investment proposal that had been rejected, my discovery of Derek's mismanagement, my grandfather's decision to transfer his shares to me, and my subsequent acquisition of controlling interest. I didn't do this to hurt anyone, I concluded. I did it to save Grandpa's company and to claim the place in it that I'd earned through my work and education. My mother had barely touched her food, her expression growing more troubled as I spoke. Why didn't you tell us what you were planning? She asked. Would you have supported me? I countered gently. Or would you have tried to talk me out of it for the sake of family peace? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Rachel had listened in stony silence. So Derek really was churning accounts, she finally asked, her voice small. Yes, I said. The Lawson account was the worst, but there were others. He was generating commissions at the expense of client returns. Did Dad know? I hesitated, not wanting to drive a wedge between my sister and our father. But I had promised honesty. The evidence suggests he did, yes. Rachel pushed her plate away. I don't know what to believe. Derek swears you're exaggerating to justify a hostile takeover. The records are clear, I said. I can show them to you if you want. I don't know anything about financial records, she snapped. I'm a kindergarten teacher, remember? The one who wasn't smart enough for the family business. The bitterness in her voice surprised me. Rachel, no one ever thought you weren't smart enough. You just weren't interested in finance. Because Dad made it clear early on that you were the one being groomed for the company, she said. Until you weren't. And then suddenly, it was all about Derek. I hadn't realized Rachel had her own complicated feelings about our father's favoritism. We'd never really talked about it. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know you felt that way. She sighed. It doesn't matter now. The point is, you've blown up our family. Dad's talking about contesting the share transfer. He says Grandpa isn't mentally competent to make those decisions. That made me angry. Grandpa is as sharp as ever. Dad's just looking for an excuse. Maybe, Rachel conceded. But this is going to get ugly, Izzy. Really ugly. She was right. Over the next few weeks, my father launched a multi-pronged attack. He filed a legal challenge to my grandfather's share transfer, claiming undue influence. He contacted clients directly, suggesting the company was unstable under new leadership. He even tried to rally employees against me, with limited success. Derek, meanwhile, took a different approach. He accepted the probationary terms, came to work with a new humble attitude, and made a show of cooperating with the audit team. But I knew he was just biding his time, looking for leverage. The family tension spilled over into every aspect of our lives. Sunday dinners at my parents' house, a tradition since childhood, ceased. My mother tried to arrange a peace summit, inviting me to lunch with my father, but he refused to attend if I was there. He feels betrayed, Isabel, she told me, the strain evident in her voice. You went behind his back. After he pushed me out of the company for no reason except that I'm a woman, I reminded her. That's not fair, she protested. Your father isn't sexist. He just has traditional views about women's roles. I finished for her. Mom, that's the definition of sexism. She had no response to that. The hardest part was the rift with Rachel. Her loyalty was torn between her husband and her sister. Derek was feeding her his version of events, painting himself as the victim of my vendetta. I tried to give her space, but the distance between us grew. Things came to a head at Thanksgiving. My mother insisted on trying to have a family dinner, despite all evidence that it was a terrible idea. My grandfather declined to attend, citing his health but privately telling me he didn't want to be used as a pawn in Warren's game. I arrived at my parents' home with a pie and a knot in my stomach. My father was in the living room, pointedly engrossed in a football game. He didn't acknowledge my presence. My mother fluttered nervously between us, filling the silence with meaningless chatter about the turkey. Rachel and Derek arrived last. Derek had the audacity to greet me as if nothing had happened. How's it going, boss? He said with a smirk that told me he thought his position was improving.
Dinner was excruciating.
My father spoke only when directly addressed. Derek dominated the conversation with stories about his clients, carefully edited to make him sound like a financial genius. Rachel watched me with wary eyes, as if expecting me to contradict him and create a scene. I was about to excuse myself, unable to bear the tension any longer, when my father suddenly spoke. I got a call from Thomas Whitaker yesterday, he said, looking directly at me for the first time. He mentioned how pleased he is with the company's performance lately. I set down my fork. Thomas has always been supportive of innovation. He also mentioned, my father continued, that you've reinstated the college scholarship program I cut last year, using company funds for community relations rather than profit. The scholarship program was Grandpa's initiative, I said. It identifies talented students from underprivileged backgrounds who might have an aptitude for finance. It's an investment in future talent, not just community relations. My father's expression was unreadable. And the profit sharing for employees? Improves retention and motivation, I replied. The cost is offset by increased productivity. He nodded slowly, then returned to his meal without another word. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it was the closest thing to a civil conversation we'd had since the takeover. After dinner, I found Rachel alone in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Need help? I offered. She shrugged. If you want. We worked in silence for a moment before she spoke again. Derek's been acting weird lately, she said quietly. Secretive. He's been taking a lot of private calls. I kept my expression neutral. Have you asked him about it? He says it's work stuff. That you've got him on such a short leash, he has to be careful about everything. She glanced toward the dining room to make sure we were still alone. But last night, I saw some paperwork he left out. Something about a transfer to a Cayman Islands account. My heart sank. We had been monitoring Derek closely at work, but if he was setting up offshore accounts, he might be planning something more serious than we'd anticipated. Rachel, I said carefully, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell Derek we had this conversation. She studied my face, then nodded. Okay. The audit team has found discrepancies in several of Derek's old accounts. Money that can't be accounted for. It's not definitive yet, but you think he's stealing? She interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. I think it's a possibility we're investigating, I said. If he's setting up offshore accounts, that's concerning. Rachel leaned against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. Our marriage hasn't been great for a while, she admitted. Even before all this happened. He's always working late, always on his phone. I thought maybe he was having an affair. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Whatever my issues with Derek, I never wanted my sister to be hurt. Don't be, she replied. I think I've known for a while that something wasn't right. With Derek, with Dad, with the whole family dynamic. I just didn't want to see it. The next day, I called our head of security and asked him to accelerate the investigation into Derek's accounts. Within a week, we had conclusive evidence. Derek had been skimming from client accounts for over a year, siphoning small amounts that added up to nearly $300,000. I called Rachel before we took action. We have proof, I told her. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to terminate Derek and report this to the authorities. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, do what you have to do, Izzy. I filed for separation yesterday. Derek was escorted from the building that afternoon. He didn't go quietly, shouting accusations and threats until security had him outside. My father called that evening, his voice tight with anger. You've destroyed my daughter's marriage, he accused. Derek destroyed his own marriage by stealing from clients, I replied calmly. You drove him to it with your vendetta. If you'd stayed in your place. My place? I interrupted. And what place is that, Dad? Not in the executive suite, clearly. Not making decisions. Just being a good secretary. That's not what I meant, he backpedaled. It's exactly what you meant, I said. And it's why we're here now. Because you couldn't see past your own prejudice to recognize what was best for the company and the family. He hung up without responding. The following week, my grandfather made a public statement supporting my leadership, effectively ending my father's legal challenge to the share transfer. The statement was published in the Boston Business Journal and widely circulated in financial circles. Morgan Financial was founded on principles of integrity, innovation, and meritocracy, he wrote. Under Isabel Morgan's leadership, the company is returning to those values. As the founder, I could not be more proud of my granddaughter's vision and courage. My father stopped coming to the office after that. He formally accepted the severance package I had offered and retreated to the family's vacation home in Maine. My mother divided her time between being with him and tentative visits to me and Rachel. The family was fractured, perhaps irrevocably. But amid the personal pain, the company was thriving. Client satisfaction was at an all-time high. The Sustainable Investment Division had doubled its assets under management. Employee morale had improved dramatically as merit was rewarded regardless of gender or connections. And despite everything, there was a small part of me that hoped someday my father would recognize what I had accomplished. Not just for myself, but for the company he claimed to love. 6 months after the confrontation in my office, Morgan Financial was a different company. We had fully recovered from the damage done under my father and Derek's leadership, adding 15 new major clients and expanding our Sustainable Investment Division into its own subsidiary. Industry publications were calling us the model for 21st century financial advisory services. Mitchell had transitioned from interim CEO to permanent board chairman, providing wisdom and stability while allowing me to implement my vision as CEO. Patricia had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, her organizational skills and institutional knowledge proving invaluable. My grandfather's health had improved dramatically once the stress of watching his company decline was removed. At 83, he still had no interest in returning to daily operations, but He visited the office occasionally and beamed with pride as employees stopped to greet him. "You've done what I always hoped you would," he told me during one such visit. "You've taken Morgan Financial beyond what it was and made it better." On the personal front, things were more complicated. Rachel and Derek's divorce was proceeding, messy, but inevitable after his financial crimes came to light. He had avoided jail time by agreeing to full restitution, but his career in finance was effectively over. Rachel had moved temporarily into my spare bedroom while looking for her own place, a tentative reconciliation between sisters. My mother had finally stopped trying to excuse my father's behavior and was beginning to rebuild her own identity beyond being Warren Morgan's wife. She had enrolled in art classes, a passion she had abandoned early in her marriage, and was talking about traveling, something my father had never enjoyed. As for my father, he remained in self-imposed exile in Maine. According to my mother, he spent his days on the water in his small sailboat, coming home sunburned and silent. He refused to discuss the company or me. "He's wounded," my mother explained during one of our weekly lunches. "His pride, his sense of identity. Everything he thought he knew has been upended." "I never wanted to hurt him," I said. "I just wanted the chance to prove myself." "I know that now," she replied. "I should have seen it sooner." The real surprise came when we decided to rename the company headquarters after my grandfather. The Harold Morgan Building would be unveiled at a ceremony celebrating the company's 45th anniversary. We invited clients, employees, press, and family. I didn't expect my father to attend, but I sent an invitation out of courtesy. The day of the ceremony was bright and clear, the kind of perfect October day that New England is famous for. The lobby of the building had been transformed with flowers and a massive portrait of my grandfather in his prime. At 83, he was still handsome, the resemblance between us unmistakable. I was reviewing my speech when Patricia approached, looking uncomfortable. "Your father is here," she said quietly. I looked up in surprise. "Where?" "In the reception area. He said he'll understand if you don't want him to stay." I took a deep breath. "No, it's fine. He should be here. It's his father we're honoring." My father looked older than when I'd last seen him 6 months ago. His hair had more gray, and he'd lost weight. But he was impeccably dressed in his best suit, a small gesture of respect for the occasion. "Isabel," he greeted me formally. "Dad," I replied. "I'm glad you came." He nodded stiffly. "My father deserves this recognition." "Yes, he does," I agreed. "Would you like to sit with the family in the front row?" He hesitated, then nodded again. "If that's acceptable." The ceremony itself was everything I had hoped it would be. Clients spoke about my grandfather's integrity. Former employees shared stories of his mentorship. I gave a speech about his vision and how it continued to guide the company. Throughout it all, my father sat silently between my mother and grandfather, his expression inscrutable. After the formal unveiling of the building plaque, there was a reception with champagne and canapés. I was speaking with a group of clients when I felt a touch on my elbow. "My father. Could we speak privately?" he asked. I excused myself from the group and led him to a quiet corner of the room. "The company looks good," he said, gesturing around at the renovated space, the happy employees, the satisfied clients. "You've done well." Coming from my father, this was the equivalent of effusive praise. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." He cleared his throat. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About the company. About us." He paused, visibly struggling. My father had never been good at apologies or admitting mistakes. "I was wrong about you," he finally said. "About your capabilities." I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment. I was stunned into momentary silence. In all my imaginings of this moment, and I had imagined it countless times, I had never really believed he would acknowledge his error. "I appreciate you saying that," I managed. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "Not to come back to the company or to be forgiven. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what you've accomplished, and that I'm—" He hesitated again. "Proud of you." The words I had waited my entire life to hear. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. This wasn't the time for emotional displays. "Thank you," I said again more softly. He nodded, apparently having said all he came to say, and turned to leave. "Dad," I called after him. He paused, looking back. "The company could use experienced advisors for some of our legacy clients. If you're interested, we could discuss a consulting arrangement. Part-time on your terms." He seemed to consider it for a long moment. "I'll think about it," he said finally. It wasn't a reconciliation, exactly. There was too much history, too much hurt on both sides for that. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall that had been built between us. In the weeks that followed, I implemented a new initiative that had been forming in my mind since taking over the company, the Morgan Women in Finance Foundation. Its mission was to identify and support young women interested in financial careers through scholarships, mentorships, and internships. The next generation shouldn't have to fight the battles we did, I told my grandfather when I shared the plan with him. Harold would be proud, he said, referring to his own father who had encouraged him to start the company. And so am I. My father did eventually accept the consulting position, working remotely most of the time but coming into the office occasionally for client meetings. Our interactions remained professional, the personal wounds still too fresh for anything more. But there was a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. Rachel found her own apartment and a new job teaching at a different school, away from the memories of her life with Derek. Slowly, we rebuilt our sisterly relationship, stronger in some ways for having been tested. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. "Taking over the company the way you did? All the family drama it caused." I considered the question seriously. The past year had been the most challenging of my life. I had lost relationships, exposed painful truths, and been forced to make difficult decisions that hurt people I loved. But I had also reclaimed my professional identity, saved my grandfather's company, and created opportunities for employees who had been overlooked. I had proven to myself and others that I was capable of leading, of making tough choices, of standing firm in the face of opposition. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. I regret that it had to happen that way. I wish Dad had seen my value without being forced to. I wish Derek hadn't betrayed Rachel's trust. But given the circumstances, I made the right choice." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "I think you did too," she said, surprising me. "And you know what? I'm proud of you, Izzy. It took guts to do what you did." Coming from my sister, who had lost the most in the aftermath of my actions, this meant everything. As I sat in my grandfather's old chair that evening after Rachel left, looking at the family photos I kept on my desk, my grandfather at the company's opening, my parents on their wedding day, Rachel and me as children, I felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The price of standing up for myself had been high. Family relationships had been damaged, some perhaps beyond repair. But I had remained true to myself and my capabilities. The company now reflected my vision: progressive, meritocratic, ethical. The Morgan legacy would continue, not as my father had envisioned it, but stronger and more inclusive. Sometimes I realized you have to break things in order to rebuild them better. And in the breaking and rebuilding of Morgan Financial, I had also rebuilt myself, no longer the overlooked daughter, the underestimated woman, the glorified secretary. I was Isabel Morgan, CEO, carrying my family's name and legacy forward on my own terms. If there's one thing my journey has taught me, it's that sometimes the hardest battles are fought with those closest to us. Family karma has a way of revealing our true selves, both the best and worst parts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family who underestimated you? What was your moment of truth? Please like this video if you found something meaningful in my experience. Subscribe for more family stories that show the complicated reality of standing up for yourself, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to claim your worth, even when those who should support you the most are the ones standing in your way. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most important recognition isn't from others, but from yourself.